Welcome to episode 2 of our NHL Trade Talk series, where we put a game show feel on some NHL Trade Talk scenarios. Today we're featuring another hockey channel called BNG Hockey. We'll jump into that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, today we're into episode 2 of our new NHL Trade Talk series. So in case you missed episode 1, which featured Justin from Hands Down Hockey, essentially how this is going to work, as I mentioned, is a little bit of a game show type of feel. I've given these other hockey channels 3 questions. Each question has a pair of NHL well-established players, some of which have been heavily involved in the NHL trade rumor mill over the last several months, and I want their opinions over which of these 2 players would be most likely to be traded before the other one. It's just for fun. We're not talking about an actual NHL trade rumors today. This is just for fun, entertaining hockey discussion and debate. So as I mentioned yesterday as well, it doesn't mean we think these players are going to be traded, and it doesn't mean that they're going to be. So certainly take that as you will, and consider that when you're leaving your comments down below. So first up here, we're going to have Dylan from BNG Hockey join us, and the first set of players I've given him to take a look at is a pair of Tampa Bay Lightning players heavily involved in trade rumors, Tyler Johnson and Alex Killorn.
Hey guys, it's Dylan from BNG Hockey, where it's always black and gold. Really excited to be a part of this video. Big thanks to Mike for having me on the channel. Now let's get started. Alex Killorn and Tyler Johnson. Now, it's no secret the Tampa Bay Lightning are really struggling with their current cap situation. In fact, as it is right now, they have 0 salary cap space, and still 2 players to sign, including center Anthony Cirelli and defenseman Erik Cernak. Now, in order to get space to sign those guys, they're likely going to have to move some players that they otherwise wouldn't want to move. 2 names that keep popping up are guys like Tyler Johnson and Alex Killorn. Now, these are 2 similar players in age, but after that, they kind of separate in similarities. Tyler Johnson is 30 years old and he's signed for 4 more years, making $5 million. Alex Killorn is 31 and he's signed for 3 more years, making $4.45. Now, the player I think is more likely to be moved is Tyler Johnson because, 1, it does save them just a little bit more cap space, and when you're as tight to the cap as Tampa Bay is, every penny counts. But also, I feel like a team would want the offense more from Tyler Johnson. Now, Killorn had a better year offensively, and I realize that he's a more well-rounded player and might do better in a top 6 role on another team. But I do think that Tyler Johnson still has the most offensive upside because he's purely offense. I love Killorn's game, but I would say that there are definitely times where he's more focused on back-checking, playing defense, getting physical. He's a fantastic leader as well, so I feel like he brings a lot more of the details to the game, and Tyler Johnson really just plays offense for you or does nothing for you. So I think he could fit in a team that needs a good, solid second-line center or winger. He does bring that versatility as well, which is helpful to some teams. If you get banged up down the middle, you can move him over, or if you need a winger who can score, certainly Tyler Johnson can do that for you. I also think if Tampa's going to hang on to one of them, they would want a guy like Killorn. They have plenty of pure offense type players, like Kucherov, like Palat, like Stamkos. Even a guy like Brayden Point, who is solid defensively as well, is all offense all the time when he feels like it. So Tyler Johnson honestly gets a little bit repetitive, and you don't need him to play center in Tampa, especially if they re-sign a guy like Anthony Cirelli. So all in all, I feel like it just makes more sense to move on from Tyler Johnson and keep a guy like Killorn, because I feel like he fits better into what Tampa would need, so that not every player is exactly the same. When you're building a hockey team, you need different styles of player, and if you got rid of Alex Killorn, then they would be looking for a guy like Killorn. So if I had to pick between the 2, I would say Tyler Johnson is more likely to be moved.
Lots of great points there from Dylan on these 2 players from the Lightning. I personally think that Alex Killorn has a little bit more value, a little bit more of a well-rounded player, as he'd mentioned, so I certainly tend to agree with that analysis. I do think, though, there's a real possibility we are going to see both of these guys moved. I know Johnson is definitely the player the Lightning want to move first, but based on their cap and what they need to do, I'm convinced they really need to move 2 players, and I think at the end of the day, they're both going to be wearing different NHL jerseys when next season comes around. Now, next up, I gave Dylan a couple of players that are tied to the Boston area. One being Jake Debrusk, of course, current Boston Bruin, and a player who has recently signed a new contract, but has dealt with a lot of speculation throughout his young NHL career. And Johnny Gaudreau, who's been obviously heavily rumored to be on the move from the Flames for a long time, has a lot of ties to the Eastern U.S. and the area. So let's see what he has to say about these two players.
Jake Debrusk and Johnny Gaudreau. These are two guys who have found their names in trade rumors quite a bit recently, and it makes a lot more sense after this season. Johnny Gaudreau had a horrendous year based on his standard of play, and Jake Debrusk has been inconsistent really every year and had a down year the past season as well. They're both on very movable contracts. Johnny Gaudreau has 2 years left at $6.75, and Jake Debrusk just signed a 2-year bridge deal at $3.6. If those players play to their ceiling and the level we all know they can hit, those are really good cap hits, and I don't think any GM would have a problem trading for either of those guys at that cap hit. So that's not really a problem there. As far as which of the two I think is more likely to be moved, I would say Johnny Gaudreau, and that's simply because of the organization he plays for. Now, I'm trying not to be biased here. Obviously, I'm a Bruins fan, but I just find it far more likely that Calgary is able to pull off a trade involving Gaudreau than Boston is with a trade involving Debrusk. Don Sweeney's biggest deal is probably Rick Nash. His best deal is Charlie Coyle for Ryan Donato, but those are really minor moves. It's not like it's superstar for superstar or big packages with lots of players and picks going both ways, and I have seen Calgary do that kind of trade. So I think it's far more likely that they're able to pull that off. Also, the haul that you'd be getting for a guy like Johnny Gaudreau would be insane, especially if he goes out and has a great year this season and they wait till after that year to flip him. I think you'd get a lot of really nice assets back, and maybe it's time for Calgary to start switching over to the next core with guys like Tkachuk. As far as the Bruins, Jake Debrusk could be a part of that next core. He's still only 24, he still hasn't reached his ceiling you would hope, and maybe the Bruins just wait it out, see at the end of these 2 years if they're still having the same problems with him, and then move him. I would say he at least has until the end of this season to prove himself to the Bruins, and they wouldn't have re-signed him if they're going to immediately flip him, in my opinion. I think they would have just traded his rights and let the new team figure out his next deal. So of the two, I find it far more likely that Johnny Gaudreau gets moved.
In my opinion, it certainly would be a tough choice to make between these two guys. I think there's a decent chance both could be moved, but as far as which one is going to be moved first, I think I'd probably pick Jake Debrusk just because he's making a little bit less money, and I know the Bruins really want to bring in somebody to stabilize that back end after losing Torrey Krug, possibly not having Captain Zdeno Chara come back. So I would think that kind of trade would be more likely to happen first. But I wouldn't be surprised maybe in 1 or even 2 years' time if both these guys are wearing different jerseys. Now lastly here, I gave Dylan a pair of defensemen, both linked to his hometown beloved Boston Bruins, Oliver Ekman-Larsson of the Coyotes and Noah Hanifin of the Calgary Flames.
Oliver Ekman-Larsson and Noah Hanifin. These are two players I've been talking quite a bit about this offseason. They've both been trade targets of my very own Boston Bruins, but any NHL team should be interested in these guys. They're both great defensemen, but with one big difference between them, and that's their salary cap hits. Ekman-Larsson is 29 years old with 7 years left on a contract that pays him $8.25 million per season. Noah Hanifin is 23 with a 4-year contract making $4.95 per season. That contract's a little bit easier to manage. Now, there are some fans out there who are disappointed in Noah Hanifin and think he should be a lot further along with how high he got picked in a stacked draft class. I would say he's still a legit top 4 growing defenseman who's only 23 years old. Defensemen do take a little bit longer to develop, so he could still get better. Certainly, you could argue he should be a little bit better in his own end. Maybe you want him to throw up 5, 10, 15 more points to his totals, but he's still a legit top 4 defenseman, and for the cap hit he's at now and the production you get out of him, it's not unreasonable. On the other hand, Ekman-Larsson, his contract is unreasonable for the level of play he's at right now. And to be honest with you, I think he just needs to get away from the Coyotes. And that's not a bash on the Coyotes, it's just that time. Also, I think they might be going in a different direction than Ekman-Larsson would hope. I could totally see the Coyotes falling back into a rebuild. They're going to be switching divisions when the Kraken come into the league, and they're going to have to play some legit teams like the Dallas Stars, the Colorado Avalanche, and they'll be in their division, so it's not going to be like they're taking advantage of the California teams who are all in rebuilds anymore. So I feel like with the direction the team's going, with all the drama of trying to move Ekman-Larsson this offseason, with him being unhappy that they were trying to move him and only being willing to go to Vancouver or Boston, I feel like all of that combined with his big cap hit is going to result in him being traded. I would not trade Noah Hanifin if I was Calgary. I just talked about them maybe going in a new direction with a younger core with guys like Tkachuk. I think Hanifin could be a part of that younger core. He's still so young, and at this cap hit with this kind of term, it'd be silly for the Calgary Flames to move him unless it was a good package coming the other way. So I think it's far more likely that Ekman-Larsson gets moved, although at these times, it is a big cap hit to swallow, so the Coyotes might have to take on some salary. But if they're willing to do that and they can find a deal, I would say it's far more likely and a lot smarter for a team to move on from Ekman-Larsson than Noah Hanifin. I want to know your thoughts down below in the comments. What do you think of my choices? What would your choices be? If you enjoy this kind of content, make sure you subscribe to Top Shelf Hockey. He's got all kinds of videos just like this with tons of trade rumors, so make sure you do that if you haven't already. If you want more of me, head on over to BNG Hockey and subscribe. Thanks again to Mike for having me on the channel. I'll see you guys soon.
Certainly a great analysis there, but my opinion would be that Hanifin, I think, would be the more likely one to be traded amongst the two, just because I think he has the more reasonable contract, and of course Ekman-Larsson has that no move. We already seen the fact before that he's only willing to negotiate with the Coyotes to talk to a couple of different teams. Doesn't give them a lot of options. Wouldn't be shocked if they do revisit that scenario at some point and the Coyotes possibly do end up moving Ekman-Larsson, but I think the more likelihood of Hanifin being moved, because he doesn't have that trade protection and a more reasonable contract, he would certainly be my pick amongst those two guys on who was more likely to be moved first. So again, thank you to Dylan of BNG Hockey for coming on and giving his thoughts and analysis here on these 6 players. I certainly appreciate it. As I mentioned before, certainly go check out his channel. He's really close to 1,000, and I'd love to see him hit that milestone here in the very near future. So certainly go check him out and consider giving him a subscription. Of course, as I mentioned yesterday as well, I certainly want to hear more thoughts and opinions on all these kind of trade scenarios that we talked about today. And I also want to hear from you, who else would you like to see appear in this series? There's all kinds of great hockey channels, many of which I've collabed with in the past, and I may already be in discussions with to do another part here in this series, but I'd love to know who else you'd like to see, and I'll certainly do my best to reach out and see if I can get them on the channel. Let me know your thoughts down below, and we'll discuss all that stuff further. Of course, if you're new to Top Shelf Hockey, consider subscribing here as well. We have lots more in this series and all the other NHL news to keep you up to date. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.